Wonderful. Welcome, everyone. This is our Why Do You Vote Tuesday morning coffee chat. Today is our marriage equality topic, and we have some great guest speakers with Joey Espinoza-Hernández from the Los Angeles LGBTQ Plus Center, or correct me if I got the letters right. And we have Spencer MacNaughton, who is just beginning Uncloseted Media, if I'm correct, and who is also at NYU. And I'm looking forward to having another great conversation around how we can vote and support marriage equality and what's happening across the country. And with that, I would like to also welcome Joe Altapeter, who is our marriage equality ambassador. Joe, do you want to say hello?
Yeah, hi, good morning, everyone. Yeah, it's exciting to be volunteering alongside of Holly and Nancy and Michelle and everyone else. And yeah, today we will be discussing marriage equality. I've been in this fight for LGBTQIA plus folks, HIV and AIDS folks, for almost 3 decades. I started when I was two. I think I said that last time, but yeah, it's exciting that Holly, that you and the folks at Why Do You Vote included marriage equality, because many of us don't know that marriage equality is actually on the ballot in California, Colorado, and Hawaii. So I won't speak more about that. I'll let our guest speakers speak more about that. But yeah, I'm glad to be here this morning and welcome Spencer and Joey to the conversation. Um, I'll turn it back to you, Holly.
Thank you. Well, let's start first with Joey and the great work that you are doing at the center here in Los Angeles.
Yeah, thank you so much. So thank you, everyone. My name is Joey Espinoza-Hernández. Pronouns they, them, there's an ella, and I serve as the Director of Policy and Community Building for the Los Angeles LGBT Center. We are the largest provider of services to the LGBTQ community in the world. We have about 800 staff, have about 500,000 client visits a year. I have the great opportunity of being able to work on advocacy at the local, state, and federal level, and also running national programs like our National LGBTQ Institute on Intimate Partner Violence and our international programs. So protecting and expanding the rights of the LGBTQ community has been a quintessential component of the Los Angeles LGBT Center. We were founded on the radical notion that LGBTQ young people should have a place to be able to sleep. That spirit of the work has continued on for the last close to 60 years. And so we're really proud to be able to provide services to LGBTQ seniors through our affordable housing units, or also our drop-in center, our supporting LGBTQ youth. We have 125 beds across LA County to house young people, 200 for affordable housing for LGBTQ seniors. We have a culinary arts program that's an intergenerational program between those two groups. We also provide immigration services. We run a federally qualified health center. We specialize in being able to provide specialty care to LGBTQ women, transgender folks, and folks living with HIV and AIDS. So I mention all of this because the center is really at the nexus of the fight. We continue to see and hear all of this anti-transgender rhetoric across the country, particularly attacking transgender young people. And the foundation of that is that LGBTQ people shouldn't be free. There's something about our identity, or how we live our life, who we love, where some folks in this country think that should be limited, that we shouldn't be able to live the American dream that other folks are able to have. And as a child of immigrants, I cherish the American dream. And so to be able to have the opportunity to advocate for LGBTQ folks is really where we need the movement to be. And when all of these fundamental civil rights are being challenged, and when we can't be free, we have to fight back against all of these attacks. And unfortunately, marriage is one of those, something that we've worked very long and hard for, because of an extremely left Supreme Court, that was mostly appointed by a Trump administration. We now have to worry about these fears here, again in California. And super glad to be a part of this conversation, to talk about what we need to do, come November, to make sure that marriage continues to be law of the land here, at least here in California.
Thank you, Joey. And I had the pleasure of attending one of your holiday trans parties with my child, and it was such a great place to help with him feeling welcome and just whole, and such a supportive center. And so I really appreciate it. It's amazing. I didn't know how vast your work is, and it's so needed. And I look forward to having, people can think of their questions for Joey later. And then next, I'd like to welcome Spencer MacNaughton and tell us about your work and what's coming up with Uncloseted Media.
Yes, thank you guys so much for having me. It's nice to be here for sure. I think I don't even know how I got here, honestly. I think Joe, you found me on LinkedIn. Yes, but no, exciting to be here. I'm a journalist, so not in the advocacy space, in the journalism space, and I've worked in mainstream media for over a decade. I'm coming to you from Toronto, where I was born and raised, but I live in New York. I'm just home for a couple weeks now. And I have worked at 60 Minutes, at the Wall Street Journal. I've written and produced stories for Rolling Stone, New York Times. I even was a staffer at Nickelodeon News. So to Joey's point, I really have worked, for fun, slimy stories about kids, but I'm also deeply aware of the experience of queer kids in this country right now, and how different that is from most other, developed countries, progressive countries, including Canada. The policies are a lot more aggressive, and the situation, I would say, is a lot more dangerous for LGBTQ kids in the United States compared to most other, developed countries with similar policies in different spaces. And I've always recognized that there's a gap in coverage when it comes to America's anti-LGBTQ ecosystem, particularly, right? I've done a lot of documentaries on other far-right extremist groups. I was with the Ku Klux Klan for 2 weeks. I was with the Michigan Militia. I was with the Boogaloo Boys. I've been with terrorist groups like Atomwaffen. And the difference between hate groups of other minority groups and LGBTQ hate groups is that the anti-LGBTQ groups come not with a hood like the KKK would, but with an Ivy League degree in suits. And they have access to some of the most powerful spaces in this country. And they're the epitome of wolves in sheep's clothing, right? So I am creating Uncloseted Media to fill a gap in coverage of this ecosystem, right? Because as journalists, we're not doing a good job covering this. And there, frankly, is so much low-hanging fruit to expose this and to show that, there is a coordinated effort. When you look at the school board meetings, when you look at the so-called parents' rights groups, every single county in every single state across this country, there's an aggressive coordinated attack. It's not like constituents are banging down the state legislatures saying, please introduce 40 anti-trans bills. People don't care about that. They want the pothole fixed down the street, right? So that's what Uncloseted Media is meant to do. It's meant to expose America's anti-LGBTQ ecosystem, but then also, not all a sob story, elevate the voices of everyday American heroes fighting back, right? So those could be, Republican dads of trans kids who are in state legislatures fighting for kids to get access, their trans kid to get access to healthcare. It could be teachers in Florida saying, we will say gay in our classroom, right? There are really, really impressive people who are fighting back against oppression and ignorance, and we're also going to elevate those voices. So we're working as a nonprofit newsroom in a deep, deep fundraising space right now. So if anyone is open to contributing or knows folks in their orbit who may be open to contributing, I'd love to, get connected. Or if you just want to learn more about Uncloseted, we launched September 3rd, the day after Labor Day, and we'll have a set of election-themed stories and education-themed stories since we're in that back-to-school timeframe. And then we'll have, multiple stories every week after that, all original reporting, all nonpartisan, objective journalism. We're trying to be the first queer publication to effectively move past the LGBTQ echo chamber and get to mainstream audiences. So we're disproportionately covering the Bible Belt, the Midwest, red and rural states, and we're intentionally looking at partnerships with publications like USA Today, like Time Magazine, places where America's, movable middle, center right, center left, would actually be able to access our stories. So that was long-winded. I hope it made sense, but yes, very glad to be here.
That is really exciting. I'm so happy to hear more, and I can't wait to see it launched. I do want to just take a minute to share about what our whole social action campaign is now before we go to the Q&A. So I'm going to share my screen really quick here. So we are a nonprofit 501c3 sponsored by Money Out Voters In, the Why Do You Vote social action campaign. And we chose 7 nonpartisan issues that over 70% of the country agrees on. So the goal is by being a bridging effort and bringing this conversation about all the things we agree on online. And I will just, we're trying to bring this conversation to young people. They are actively voting. They voted at 55% in 2020, and there's 40 million Gen Zers, and 25% of them are identifying as LGBTQ+. And I love to share this slide that the reason people vote is not about candidates. So we are bringing the conversation to the issues. It's only at a mere 10% for millennials and 13% for Gen Z that they're voting for a candidate. So we should be talking about the issues that we care about and the future we want to create, because voting is a responsibility. It can affect the outcome, and voting is a right. And, we're a social media campaign because that's where young people are getting their news, over 2 to 1. And we want it to be from friends and family. So I'm going to show a 1-minute video.
For women's choice because I vote for women's choice because we need autonomy over our own bodies. Why do you vote?
I vote because democracy is an important part of the American spirit. Why do you vote?
I vote because the people who came before me made so many sacrifices to make my vote count. And that's why I vote. Why do you vote?
I vote because I want kids to be safe at school. Why do you vote?
I vote because of marriage equality. Why do you vote?
For our environment, to hear our planet, to hear your rights, to hear for everything. So that's the reason I vote. Why do you vote?
I vote because I believe in universal health care for all. Why do you vote?
I vote because I care about marriage equality and people exercising their rights. Why do you vote?
I vote because action is the antidote to despair. Why do you vote?
B-O-T-E-E-E.
So you can see about what we're doing. And then the last thing I want to mention before we get to the Q&As is that we are having a Spark the Vote social media and film challenge. And it's going to be the weekend just before National Voter Registration. So we can flood the internet talking about voting for our future. I'd love to get as many videos about voting for marriage equality, talking about marriage equality, that this is something most people agree on. So that is what we are about and why we are hosting these calls every Tuesday up until the election. But really, bringing the conversation back to us. You'll see we have the heart in the middle of the U in the logo, and it's, all about all of us and our future. So with that, I would love to now welcome any questions, go further into this conversation. Does anybody have, if you guys want to share more, I'd love to hear more about your work, what you see going on.
Holly, I have a question.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Actually, I have a few questions, but I'll start with Joe. Joe, I think you said that marriage equality is on the ballot. Was it California, Colorado, and Hawaii? And can you tell us a bit about those ballot measures?
They're all similar to California. Maybe, yes. So basically, the Supreme Court back in, I forgot what year it was, Supreme Court made gay marriage legal across the country.
Obergefell, yeah.
Yes, and then Biden actually signed a law making gay marriage legal across the country in 2021, 22. But the idea for these 3 states is they want to codify it into their state constitutions in case something like Roe versus Wade gets overturned by the Supreme Court, that the states continue to have legal marriage equality within these 3 states. So I'm sure there will be more to follow after the 3 states.
Right.
California.
So they're affirming ballot measures, not attacking ballot measures.
Affirming, yes. So I do know in California, if you vote yes for marriage equality, it is yes to codify it into our Constitution. So it was a little bit confusing back in 2008. It was if you vote no, you agree with gay marriage. If you vote yes, you disagree with gay marriage. So they made it more simple this year. I think the right people were on the side of writing the ballot initiative. But I'm not quite sure how it's worded in Colorado and Hawaii. I believe it's the same. Voting yes means you support marriage equality.
Great.
Yeah.
And I forgot to add, I have this shared document where people can stay connected and find out about the bills. So I have links to Ballotpedia about California, Colorado, and Hawaii on that bill. And then if anybody wants to share their information there to stay connected, because the idea of these chats is to connect, engage, and empower. So you can get direct links, anybody who's interested in right there.
And is that also the spreadsheet just to communicate our information?
Yes, yes. And I didn't even share our website yet. So okay. And Michelle, you said you had more than one.
Yeah, I mean, and this actually speaks, I want to see if our guests have any knowledge or feedback on what we're experiencing in the marriage equality space with this Spark the Vote challenge. As Holly mentioned, we're a 501c3. We do not have a C4, but as a C3, we can expend 10% of our budget and time in support, say, of a ballot measure. But we're getting a pushback on the Spark the Vote of all of the issues that we've got. Marriage equality was flagged as somehow being perceived by the IRS as a partisan issue, which is surprising to all of us. Would you have any idea? Are you guys all nonprofits? I'm expecting Spencer, I don't know if your media work is under a nonprofit banner, but any idea why this would be flagged? As you mentioned, Obergefell is the law of the land currently. Any thoughts on this?
I would just name, and so you're saying that you received information from the IRS flagging that marriage equality.
Our lawyer is concerned that
you're an elections attorney.
Yeah, well,
yeah,
they're a nonprofit special.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So then I think when you're talking about what constitutes partisanship and non-partisanship, when you're talking to a C3 attorney, like there's going to be there's going to be a spectrum of liability that they have. The same thing about how close to you talk about LGBTQ issues versus the candidates, right? Like in presidential election, there's going to be a spectrum of which you are able to activate within that still operates within your IRS C3 guidelines. I think that if you have an attorney that's saying to you that marriage equality is a partisan issue, that person is probably really conservative. And I do think that both the Democrats and the Republicans are making LGBTQ issues a partisan issue. However, talking about LGBTQ issues under electoral code is not a partisan issue. Partisanship comes from the alignment of something with a party in the two-party system within the electoral politics, right? And like, yeah, you can acknowledge that there's other parties in there that make you partisan, but I mean, essentially, we're talking about, are you aligned with Democrats or the Republicans to be partisan? And marriage equality does not fall within that for me.
That's our feeling as well. Yeah, and surprising that, bodily autonomy, which the court overturned, isn't considered partisan, but
Right.
in her view, this is a potential flag. But we want to keep the framing as marriage equality. So
I think that if you started I think if you started endorsing a candidate that was in favor of marriage equality or not in favor of marriage equality, that's when you get into partisanship. But when you as an organization have a mission that is aligned with marriage equality, for instance, then that's actually speaking to an issue. That's not speaking to a political party,
thank
in
you.
my opinion. In my opinion.
I mean, that's our opinion too. So we're meeting with her at 11 o'clock this morning, and we'll be armed with what you said. I think, it's so vital that it remain in our issue set.
Yeah, and I'm dealing with that too as a journalistic nonprofit because we're 501(c)(3) too. We're working through a fiscal sponsor. And essentially the big fine line is you can comment on issues like Joey was saying, but the one thing we can't do, which we're not interested in doing because we don't want to do opinion pieces, is say if there's a politician who's advocating for a bill that would overturn, gay marriage, right? You can't say we hate him kind of thing. Like, you can't opine on a politician. That's really, I think Joey, correct me if I'm wrong, is what my sense is, and of how that works for C3.
I think that's mostly correct. I think when you start saying, once you cross the threshold of you need to know this because you need to vote a certain way for an elected, that's when you start going into partisanship. In comparison to a ballot initiative, right? Ballot initiative and legislation, you can tell you can engage in public education to talk about the positive and negative policy consequences of a bill. Or a ballot initiative, and it still fall within that 10% guideline, right, that you mentioned, Michelle.
Right.
But once I think you start getting closer to the line of telling a voter how to vote for a candidate, that's when you run into partisanship.
Thank you, which we will never do. And, did a little bit of research, and there seemed to be 1 billion nonprofits working in this space.
Yeah. And I would also, I totally had an additional thought, and I promised it was brilliant, and I lost it already.
It'll come back to you.
It'll come back to me.
Yeah.
But thank you for the question. We're really grappling with this right now because we want to stay within our C3 compliance. To what Spencer was talking about earlier, we engaged in a C3 compliant school board race in the primary election around transgender students and the attacks from Nazis in Glendale, which was originally founded as a sundown town, and we were based in a park that has a sign that essentially celebrates Nazi history of that park and it being owned by the German American Association. We led an anti-transgender bias reduction campaign with voters in that area to make sure that voters knew what was at stake on the ballot. And so being able to toe this line of making sure that we were exclusively talking about voters, about issues and people in schools, not necessarily elected officials, not the candidates for the campaigns. Although when you send them off to the general city clerk to figure out information, once they have their bias reduced around transgender people and have this void of information filled with accurate information rather than misinformation, then they tend to turn out in higher percentages to vote and tend to vote more liberally. And particularly in support of LGBTQ communities. And so really proud to name that there are no Nazis currently on the Glendale Unified School Board that are trying to govern. And that's the world we live in right now.
Yeah. Extraordinary. Thank you.
Following on this thread, I think, Spencer, you mentioned your work in this. Could you share more about what you're uncovering that would, be aligned with, marriage equality?
Yeah, if I'm being totally honest, we haven't done a ton on marriage equality, and I think we definitely should, especially given the kind of the states where it is in play, like you mentioned at the top of the call. But we're doing a lot on, like I said, America's anti-LGBTQ ecosystem. So, some of the stories we're looking to, launch with are, Project 2025 and the implications for LGBTQ people. That's an obvious one, right?
Yeah.
We just posted on our Instagram, and you should follow along. I'll link it after this. We're doing a soft launch, and we have, explainer videos where I explain Harris's entire history when it comes to LGBTQ, and then another one where we explain Trump's, right? We're doing this one story. Why do 10 Southern Poverty Law Center designated anti-LGBTQ hate groups have consultative status inside the United Nations? Why? That's weird, right? We're doing stuff on the Christian legal groups, Alliance Defending Freedom, who are looking to cherry pick mentally ill detransitioners online and use them as expert witnesses. We're doing one on queer kids and how school hate crimes have skyrocketed in states with more anti-LGBTQ legislation. So that's going to be a piece where we just talk to kids and only hear from kids, because so much of the media coverage talks about queer kids, but you never hear from them. And the reason for that is it's hard to get kids to talk, but our job as journalists is to get people to talk who are hard to hear from, right? And oh, thank you, Holly. And yeah, I mean, we have so many different stories in development, but that's really kind of what we're trying to do. And then another one, we're trying to do positive stories too. Another one we have in August is about the Appalachian Queer Youth Summit. I don't know if anyone's heard of that. It's super cool. And it's in the middle of West Virginia, and they're having a ton of queer kids come to some sort of camp summit. And they teach them literally how to litigate against lawmakers' kids, right? Because kids are in state legislatures now fighting against book bans or fighting against don't say gay laws, right? So they're giving them the tools to actually push back, which is very interesting. I mean, I think it's fascinating. So I don't know if that answers, but that's some of the stuff we're working on as we get set to launch.
And I want to, okay, look, Trump has changed the game. I'm going to say part of the quiet part out loud. Out of all the things that I want to be fighting for right now, marriage equality is not it. Out of all of the attacks that Spencer has mentioned, like, it doesn't necessarily result in like the criminalization of our doctors or our own bodies. Yes, it does lead to the less civil rights of our community. I think if we were in a world where like we didn't have marriage equality, this would continue to be like a part of the main part of our fight. And I think now, because of the Supreme Court, we do actually have to fight for this. But I just have to say, the thing that's turning me out to the ballot is the attack on transgender young people in schools. It's not necessarily marriage equality. And I do think that if we think about marriage equality for the LGBTQ community globally, I think it also takes a very different perspective. Like when you think about advocating for marriage equality in Asian countries, it is a viscerally different fight. I do think that Christian nationalism has had a huge impact on America and is now continuing to have an impact on Asian countries, particularly Southeast Asian countries. I think this anti-gender movement is like really crippling the advancement of LGBTQ movements, and particularly around marriage equality when we think of other countries. But like, if I really thought about the fight that I want to be fighting right now, it's ending poverty for LGBTQ folks. It is ending the criminalization of LGBTQ folks. And so like, while I think that this is the time that we do have to be fighting for folks and fighting for these rights to make sure that they don't go away, like we're also actively losing rights for segments of our community, like particularly transgender folks. And so while I think marriage equality is a fundamental right, like there are so many things that we need to be paying attention to right now because everything's under attack.
That is a great point, Joey. And I know I see a lot of homeless kids on Venice Beach
Mm-hmm.
have come here because they are not accepted at home. And you see the struggles that they're facing.
Mm-hmm.
And
when you think about LGBTQ homelessness, youth homelessness, right? 40% of young people experiencing homelessness identify as LGBTQ. Folks come to the center. We see 100 young people every single day in our drop-in center because folks are coming from other states over here because they think that it's better to be gay in LA than it is to be gay in Idaho. And turns out they end up just experiencing homelessness. Now you also have Governor Newsom, who just issued a statement that he wants to clean up all encampments in California because of the grants pass decision that happened at the Supreme Court. What is that actually going to mean? That means that we're just out of all of the places where there might have been a little bit of autonomy or a little bit of safety developed for young LGBTQ young people, because there's literally not enough beds for folks. All of that will be taken away from them and washed away, and seen as community cleanup, right? But there are so many things, there are so many policies right now that are putting LGBTQ folks in imminent danger. And that I think we need to really have a significant focus on.
And how many beds did you say you have, and how great is the need?
Oh, we have 125 beds on site and in community. But there are tens of thousands of young people experiencing homelessness in California alone, with the majority of them being in Los Angeles. And we do not have enough beds for everyone. We are very much in a survival mode as an LGBTQ social service provider. It's not like, oh, we've got unlimited resources for everybody. It's when it's available, you got to take it because it may not come back ever again.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you for the very important work you're doing, and
thank you.
Have to work together to find solutions.
Mm-hmm.
So heartbreaking. The other thing I thought is like the intersectionality of what we're trying to do is talking about all these issues together. And it's like bodily freedom when we're talking about women's bodily freedom, any transgender person's bodily freedom. There is, instead of siloing, we should be talking about everything together, because I think most people agree that everybody should have freedom over their own body.
And a place to
At
sleep.
at least when you're an adult, or there's but yes, and then just it's so heartbreaking. The whole
well, this policy is
that happened. I mean, this is where, Joe, you ran the Downtown Women's Center. I mean, you could share the abuse that happens on the street. I know we've talked about this individually.
For the past like almost 19 years, have worked at Downtown Women's Center, who does homeless services for women and any individual identifying as a woman. So we work with the queer community as well. Not as much so. We're in Skid Row. So we do like 500, we have about 550 units of permanent supportive housing for individuals. But yeah, that is a huge issue. I love that, Joey, that you brought that, that is an elephant in the room. And historically, that was an elephant in the room. Like when Hawaii first decided that they wanted to have legalized gay marriage historically in 1998, I think is when it was, the gay community was like, what the fuck do we care about marriage? Like, and me personally, I feel like it's part of the patriarchy and part of the homophobia that solidifies, hatred towards the LGBTQ community. So yes, why gay marriage? And then all of a sudden it was like, there was this tidal wave when folks voted against it in Hawaii, then there was this tidal wave of people across the country saying, this is maybe something that we need to fight for, because we do, even though as individuals, we might not agree with marriage as an institution, but we do agree that equality is something that we do agree upon. So then marriage kind of took root across the country. Not that there was many more pressing issues. So my concern with the I guess I was going to ask a question, and maybe it was already answered, was how many folks know about this? Because I only learned about it probably 3 months ago, because I went to the LGBT Center in Long Beach to get a photograph of that guy that did the no hate on people's faces, and he mentioned to me that it's going to be back on the ballot in 2024. So I don't know how many people know about it, and my question was going to be like, how do you feel, Spencer, Joey, like, is, Camel is taking all of the news cycle currently. Trump takes all of the news cycle. So these issues, even all of the 7 issues, but since today we're talking about marriage equality, this gets lost. And it is on the ballot in 3 states. And I'm curious as to what you've heard about it. The 2 of you have heard about it, being in the know about gay and lesbian issues, and where we're at there. Yeah.
So I would say, at least for LGBTQ organizations in California, we've been so hyper focused on the 4 anti-trans ballot initiatives that the marriage equality ballot measure was almost like a side project for some of us. So to talk about how we got here, right? To Joe's point earlier that you made, um, in the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe v. Wade, Justice Alito named that they could apply this legal framework to the Obergefell decision, which ultimately would overturn, which, if they were to overturn it, would allow for the language in California Constitution, which was passed in 2008, right, through Prop 8, would become law of the land, right? Because the Defense of Marriage Act, like, basically said that they would recognize federal marriages, but that states still had the ability to make decisions on their own. So with this piece, right, like, we could have a ban on marriage equality again in California. But at the same, and that got onto the ballot because there was a good state legislator that was affirming of LGBTQ rights that was like, okay, like, let's put this on the ballot and let's figure this out. Let's make sure that in case there's a Trump administration, in case there's all of these bad things, right, like, we'll be good. So there's a second way to get onto the ballot, which is through getting voters to sign petitions. And so at the same time that this was happening, right, there was the Protect Kids California group that was trying to gather signatures and raise dollars to ban gender-affirming care, to ban transgender young people from sports teams, and to mandate forced outings of transgender students when they came out at school. Within 48 hours of sharing their name and pronouns, school administrators were supposed to notify parents, regardless of the safety of the young person, right? So wildly unpopular policies in California. I think people took the most offense to the forced outing policies because it, like, immediately puts young people in danger. And so while all of this was happening, right, we were also trying to we were trying to get state legislation passed in California to make sure that we banned forced outing policies in general, right? So we're trying to run this opposition campaign to the 4 ballot initiatives. We're proactively moving forward a legislative campaign. And by the way, there's this marriage thing happening at the same time. And so to go back to my previous point, if we're talking about the criminalization of a young people, I'm gonna put my attention there.
Right.
And that is a very different political strategy than focusing on marriage equality, while marriage equality continues to be favorable, right? So when we think about polling, as you mentioned, right, if you think about polling of marriage equality, it has become almost a safe issue across the Democratic Party and with liberals in general. And even pops up in things like the Democratic National Committee platform. It's like a given with Democratic candidates for president. And so when we think about the political field of California, and really there are a lot of MAGA supporters and there's a lot of alt-right conservatives in California, polling suggests that it's not necessarily a huge deal, right? That it's favorable in our for pro LGBTQ rights. So when we think about marriage equality, we have to think about the political calculus and that the LGBTQ movement is limited in resources.
Thank you. The one thing legally I do want to talk about, though, is if, marriage equality were to go away, how it does affect people directly, like let's say with inheritance or when you're in the hospital, you know, if you do not have a domestic partnership, you know, it does have an impact. And that, you know, was very, you know, I know there's the whole patriarchy
For sure. Oh,
with marriage, but it's like there are legal things that are so important that marriage equality does protect.
For sure. And not to negate those in the slightest, right? And I'm much more in the LGBTQ liberate, like queer and trans liberation camp philosophy than I am LGBTQ equality, because I don't think that we should have the same rights. I think we should have more rights. But in particular, we're thinking about the rights that marriage equality gives us access to. Yeah, like absolutely. Those are all critical pieces. One of the things that has been really important for us here at the center is through our senior services department, we provide a lot of services to veterans. There's a lot of veterans who have been dishonorably discharged from the military because of same-sex contact or LGBTQ identification. We just saw the presidential movement from Biden around reclassifying folks who had been dishonorably discharged. And a lot of the folks that we see here at the center are still grappling with those major issues of being denied benefits. And so and of course, like as we've seen folks who dealt with social pressures and still didn't have the chance to get married even when it became legal, it continues to be a pressing issue. I think that if we were to see an immediate rollback of it, that would be really harsh and horrible. Absolutely. And we're also seeing immediate attacks on segments of our community.
And I'm also an adoptive parent. So my child was 15 when I adopted them. And this is one place where if you are not married, you know, LGBTQ plus parents can be deeply affected if they are wanting to create a family. And you see that, you know, in prerequisites that can happen. So just bring that in from all my adoption awareness. And it's interesting, again, that's where the Dobbs, they talked about adoption as the answer for bodily autonomy, yet not the answer. So it's interesting how we are all connected on so many other ways behind in many, you know.
And I'd agree with Joey as well. Like I wasn't honestly aware of the marriage equality stuff so much as the just spate of kind of anti-trans bills. And I think one thing that we're not doing as a media ecosystem right now is distinguishing between these far-right groups. The people behind these bills, they are not genuinely concerned about trans kids getting healthcare, right? They are also not legitimate experts, right? Like there's a group called the American College of Pediatricians, right? Who's the most cited group from Republican lawmakers when it comes to trans healthcare. They're a hate group from the Southern Poverty Law Center, right? I'm the first to say I think there's advocacy organizations who say all trans girls should play in sports. I see nuance there. The science is not there, right? We have to be honest with where we are and where we're not at. But the folks behind the bills in these countries are not part of that nuance. And I think like that's a huge, huge thing we need to own, you know, and encourage people to understand when they hit the ballot box, whether that's at the state level or the national level, right? There's a really nuanced conversation to be had about, you know, trans people in sports. That's not an easy answer. Do you know what I mean? But that's not what's taking place in state legislatures, these sorts of things, right? So I think if there's a way to educate folks to understand that, you know, the one side that's peddling these bills are not coming from a place of good faith, but rather coming from a place that they just want trans people to not exist. I think that's something that's really important to communicate that we're really doing an abhorrent job at doing right now.
I think your Uncloseted Media is going to fill a huge void, and I'm really excited to see that, you know, you highlight this conversation in a deeper way. Seems like it's really needed. Does anybody else have any questions or conversation? I think we've covered so many amazing pieces.
Fascinating.
And in such a
Joey,
great way.
I think the governor did a couple of weeks ago sign the forced outing, right? That did become law.
Yeah, Governor Newsom signed AB 1955, the Safety Act, which the center is a proud co-sponsor of.
Great. Well done.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you. Does anybody else want to chime in, share their thoughts? I really appreciate this in-depth conversation today. I think it's really needed, and I loved the way we tackled all the side issues outside of just marriage equality. I appreciate your knowledge and depth.
Yeah, I just want to appreciate Joey, especially for like unveiling something that is always been a challenge for me, especially the LGBTQ community also speaks to kind of maybe misspeaks to the issues at hand. They'll say these are LGBT laws against LGBT folks. Well, actually, there's 700 laws against trans folks, right? So they kind of tell this maybe
they conflate the alphabet.
yeah, they play the alphabet. Yeah, and because they understand, I get it why, because people are we've got a lot of, you know, pro LGBT, LBG folks that we can include the T, but I wish they would be able to say there are 500 anti-trans bills that we need to get behind, rather, you know, the kind of, rather than hiding behind it. Nothing against LGBT Center of Los Angeles. It is an amazing space, but you know, I wished we could publish the reality about trans folks that are partially that really need the equity and rather than the equality component of what we're looking for. Yeah, and then Spencer, you did a great story on someone, and I'm forgetting what state it was. It might have been like Iowa, somebody that the city determined that they couldn't do a gay and lesbian pride festival. And that's how I found you. I read the story that you did. I think that's what it was. But I read one of your stories, and that's how I
Okay,
found you. And
yeah,
it
I
was
don't think
on.
I did a story on that, but
Was
wish
it?
I did.
Okay, there was a story. Yeah,
Idaho?
yeah. So I appreciate you both. Yeah.
No. Thank you for having me. Yeah.
Well, thank you guys so much. And again, we always hope that you participate in these Tuesday chats on any of our issues. And we hope you would join our Spark the Vote social media and film challenge. We actually have over $20,000 in prizes for best videos. So we want nationwide, just people across the country participating and sharing their voice in our democratic spirit, and helping encourage everybody to get out and vote this year. So if there's nothing else, I'll end the recording now, and